Sam, thanks for taking the time to chat to me today. People know from the title of this, it'll be along the lines of skills development, avoiding the pitfalls of AI. And obviously people will be talking a lot about skills over the next couple of days. But why do you think it's so important we move away from necessarily just content and start focusing on skills?
I think historically L&D has tended to use skills for structuring and a sort of a thematic assembly in their learning management systems or LXPs. But it's not really added any value to the business. So where we start thinking about skills now is actually what's the strategic and the business benefit we can add to it. And so from that perspective, it's thinking about how skills can help us succeed as organisations. What are the skills we have now? What are the skills we need in the future? We hear lots of stories about what the average half-life of a skill is. And we also hear about the skills deficits that we've got, be it through generational differences, in the sense that maybe some of the younger generations haven't got as many interpersonal skills as people who are potentially older have done because of the nature of having gone to university through lockdown and all of that fun stuff. But also thinking about how we can develop those core skills that are essential around organisations. And that learning may not necessarily be content. It might be that there's a video that does it. It might be that there's an e-learning module that does suit, or another learning experience where you get people together to practice. But actually some of that stuff happens out in the real world, in the workplace. And so when we think about developing skills, it should be a holistic approach to L&D in the sense of everything, be it 70-20-10 or Dan Pontefract's 333 model, all of that kind of stuff being it sort of woven into how we think about development.
Yeah, I agree. We see that a lot of the time. When people start with the content, they miss all of the context around the skills the business needs, how are they going to reach their goals, like say what the current deficit is. So I guess that's a great starting point, isn't it? Trying to get a handle on what skills you do and don't currently have, and like any advice on how people can start making that shift towards skills.
I think in some ways it's worth forgetting about the technical skills, because particularly if you start working in something like software development, the half-life of one of those skills, I think somebody said to me the other day, 2.5 years. I bet realistically the pace of change, it's less than that. And when I first started out doing some web design, a lot of the stuff I learned to hand code was quickly sort of subsumed into sort of quick cheats. So I think for me it's actually thinking about what are the people skills. I was just upstairs listening to Nigel Payne talk in the conference, and he talked about generative skills, the skills that help you continue to learn, be it critical thinking, be it learning how to learn, be it reflection, and then moving on to sort of the next level of sort of power skills. How do you create great relationships with people, be it virtually or in person? How do you communicate? How do you tell a compelling story? All of those kind of things are probably the ones where I'd start thinking about, and maybe not try to link those skills to particular jobs, because we know the concept of jobs could change radically in the next few years, but actually think about it more from the how do these link into the values or the aims of our organisation, and what skills really add value there. So take a bit of a strategic level at it rather than going straight again into maybe what sometimes we default to, which is going into a content level. What's the content level I can push out?
Yeah, I mean, I had an interesting conversation with someone recently who approached it in sort of two steps, and one was to define the power skills or the soft skills first as a way of getting clarity around what it is to be successful or a good member of the team there, but also like it's a good way to introduce the sales narrative without that, the skills narrative without that really technical element. So maybe it's like you can't just do this overnight, it has to happen in stages, and maybe the human skills angle is the way to start doing it.
Yeah, and exactly, because it's a massive, I was talking to somebody else about it a few minutes ago, it's a massive cultural change, a massive transformation if you really go on a skills journey, particularly if you do that prioritising it maybe over traditional sort of skills linked to a particular job, or thinking about things like skills inside of a job. It's almost skills inside of the organisation, and then how do they potentially fall into job archetypes or job families.
Yeah, and just looking at skills related to a job can limit you, because overall you want people to be flexible internally, like Some of my skills might be really useful for a different team, for example, maybe like sales, So if it's just mapped to that, like actually collectively as an organization, what skills do we have and how does that feed into where we need to get to?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of stories before where people in talent acquisition teams have been put into potentially sales development roles because there are transferable skills. And I think that's the key thing. It's thinking about skills from their transferability. Because I think, as we were talking about the other week, it's sort of just because you haven't got a project management qualification doesn't mean you're not skilled at project management.
Yeah.
You could be a mum of 3 or a dad of 3, and you could be well used to managing to get 3 different kids to different places at different times and do the tea and do everything. The whole principle is the same, it's just the context that shifts different slightly.
Yeah, what someone said to me before was you don't need to be in the thing to do the thing. So their transition was they wanted to be in L&D. They weren't working in L&D, but they started creating enablement resources for people. And then they showed the impact that those resources had and then used that as a case to get buy-in to say, I can do more of that if I have more time and bandwidth. So I agree, it's what skills are needed to hit a certain goal, but looking more holistically about beyond qualifications. Qualifications don't equal skills, and if they did, we probably wouldn't have enough time to build the skills quickly enough to keep up.
No, I mean, qualifications is kind of an old mindset. I mean, I know we've always got the example of would you want a surgeon to operate on you without a degree? But then if I think about it, just because a surgeon's got a degree doesn't mean he's actually any good, or she's any good. So I think it's more a case of what's the data points of what success looks like, and that's another thing that L&D can look to do better, and I say that for myself as well as for sort of generally, which is how do we define success? We're still in a danger zone where even yesterday I was looking at something where it said maximising return on investment of a learning library, and it was just like, that probably means the equivalent of bums on seats, which is not success, because if people don't need to use the content or consume the learning, then because they've got a different way of developing themselves, then I don't care. What matters to me is the performance.
Well, when we spoke before, you also made the point that when you start with the content, the metric often becomes consumption, and the point of learning in general, but also content, isn't to consume it. It's about like, how do you apply it in your job? How do you actually go away and improve your performance based on the content you consume, not just I consumed it and it's game over now?
Yeah, I mean, learning is so much more than a course, because I remember once doing a piece when we were just bringing in sort of the idea of learning, or basically learning is everywhere, when I was at an old bank, and the activity that we did was basically, what was the most powerful learning experience you've ever had? And not a single person listed a course. It might have been learning to drive. It might have been working with a peer on a particular project. It might have been getting a really good coach or mentor. So I think it's thinking, yeah, absolutely. We need to get away from metrics that equals content consumption equals successful learning in organisations.
And funny enough, like literally last time I was here last year, Nelson gave a talk where he asked people to put their hand up if anyone learned like from a course, from an LMS. But when he was like podcasts, books, webinars, a colleague, a friend, like those are the things that got people to raise their hand. So, the whole concept of skills also means bringing the ecosystem together so you can learn from the right person or the right thing. If you're limited to just courses or just the pieces of content, then you're very closed off, and it makes it harder, I guess, to build the skills you need.
And also, it's not particularly speedy. I mean, let's face it, if you need to know how to do something, you need to know how to do something. Another one of the pitfalls that we have is that we often over-engineer solutions, when I always remember something that someone once said in I think it was a webinar, which was, their approach was, what's the minimum I need to do to help someone? And that might be pushing out a resource along the lines of sort of Nick Shackleton-Jones' way of thinking, or it might be just go and chat to the person who's been doing the job for 6 months longer than you have.
Yeah, just don't overcomplicate it. My favourite way to learn is a Loom video. Like if I just need someone to show me how to do something, just a 2-minute Loom video, and then I can just repeat the steps, and then a couple of times I do that, now I know how to do the things. So there is a tendency to over-engineer or really try, and I think that causes delays, doesn't it? Because if I need to create a course, that creates a delay, and if I need to consume a whole course to learn 1 or 2 things that are really important, then there's delays both ends, which is the worst case scenario, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's probably it depends on how you're approaching it. It can be potentially be slightly quicker to get a product to market with digital content as opposed to sort of the all singing, all dancing, or face-to-face type leadership development programs. But that's still often too slow for that moment of need. And sometimes that moment of need can be 5 minutes. That gap where you've just introduced a new piece of software, everybody's coming through to the help desk with the same issue. You don't want to go off and write a course. You're just going to pull together either a video or just run a quick webinar or pull together a quick how-to guide, get that on the intranet, job done.
And another thing we spoke about last time is when people do go with this content-led approach, they create a load of content and just kind of chuck it at people and leave them to their own devices. And, that creates a lack of structure. It creates a lack of clarity for people to find what they need. But that's a bit of a problem as well, isn't it? Just the wall of content that hits people.
Yeah, and I think it's not always this content that you create. I think the bigger issue that we have is the fact that where you purchase big content libraries, it's often missing the context. And when you're trying to solve a problem inside of an organisation, not supplying that context that's relevant to your organisation means that has even less meaning than all those millions of hours of Udemy or LinkedIn learning videos. So, yeah, I think it's seen as a solution to a problem, but it's not actually fixing the problem. And it's not necessarily a great instructional strategy either in terms of helping people solve that problem.
Yeah. It kind of feeds on from the very first thing we said, which is about identifying the skills you do and don't have. And, if you haven't done that part and you just chuck a load of resources at people, like how they don't know what they're meant to be developing in terms of skills. They don't know what content's actually there in that library. So, from empathizing with a learner perspective, it must be really tough in those sort of companies where there's no guidance on what skills, but there's also no guidance on even how to consume the content in an effective way for your role.
Yeah, and it's back to thinking about L&D more as what are the problems we're trying to solve and what are the real problems we're trying to solve, rather than we need a course in coaching, or we need a course in sales team development or stuff like that. So it's getting into the nuts and bolts of what those problems are, because actually those problems may have a really quick and simple solution, or it may not be something that we can affect at all, and it's an organisational process or an organisational policy that you then need to start thinking about.
And I guess that leads us nicely to the last question, because there's a lot of talks around AI this weekend. A lot of the stands have got the word AI. I mean, like 90% have got the word AI written on them. But some people are doing that thing you just mentioned. They're not really working out the real problem that needs to be solved, and they're rushing into using AI. And I know you've got some thoughts on sort of some of the pitfalls people can fall into when they do rush into using AI.
I mean, I think, let's face it, the prospect of something creating content for you, particularly if you've not got a sort of a technical e-learning background, is obviously really appealing. I personally would avoid most of those tools like the plague, because I think it's thinking about being really clear on what the instructional strategy is that you want to create a really compelling learning experience that solves the problem. Too often with some of the tools that I'm beginning to see out there is it's uploading content to spit out more content, that e-learning is not the best solution. It might be worded clunkily. It is probably using really boring, outdated instructional design strategies that I think I was looking at changing 10 years ago. And it's like, stop creating bad... And we know that e-learning has a bad rep inside of organisations because of the click next to continue stuff. And with too many of these solutions that are coming out, my concern from a content perspective is you're just going to get the same old rubbish being generated for you, and there's no excuses for that to happen. You do need that human touch to say, do those words sound like our words? Is that really necessary? If you're just telling people about stuff, turn it into a video and use an AI tool to create a video. Don't do a 30-minute e-learning module with a pointless test at the end that's based on memory recall and won't actually help you back in the workplace.
Bring it back to those generative skills, especially in the context of AI. What is like one other thing you think people could focus on?
I think it's, dare I say it, almost the librarianship skills, in terms of if you're going to do a search, if you're going to search Google, and let's face it, you can probably get most answers off of Google or YouTube, how do you drill down into the stuff that's really relevant? So almost thinking about Boolean and all that kind of stuff to whittle down those results into the stuff that it makes meaningful sense. And the same with stuff like ChatGPT, acknowledging how reliable that data may actually be. How can you actually drill down into stuff that is really the sort of the core of what you're looking for as the answer to your problem?
Yeah, I agree. I think people are figuring that out a bit more. The more they find rubbish content online, the more they're having to build that skill anyway. Sam, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation and appreciate you stopping to chat with us. Your links to your LinkedIn will be in the show notes so people can get in touch and connect with you on there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me.